Hello and welcome to GCSE Sociology at OPA. I'm going to be going through Unit 1, the first lesson, what is sociology? So first off, if you could write down the title, what is sociology? And you can see the do now there in the corner or the bottom of the screen. What do you already know about sociology? If you know nothing, then what do you think the subject is about? And as a stretch and challenge, do you have any questions you would like to ask about the course or subject? So this is the moment where you might want to pause the screen and just write your answers down, and we will follow with that routine. Okay, so in its simplest form, sociology is the scientific study of society. Sociologists want to explore human social lives and social relationships. This involves examining how people live together in society and how they interact in small groups, communities, and large organizations. So that's the key part there. If you were to define sociology at its core, how people live together in society and how they interact in small groups, communities, and large organizations. But it also looks at how individuals shape society. So you've got a nice illustration there on the right-hand side, almost as if it was a person and the person's hands being these macro structural influences in society, influencing the individual, which is the clay in this case, okay, shaping who that individual is, how they interact, and their identity. So as for task 1, if you could note down what sociology examines. So just get that definition and read down for me, please. And as your stretch and challenge, can you note down any examples where your life is influenced by society? Okay, so you might want to pause the video now and just give yourself a couple of minutes to do exactly that. Excellent. So moving on, we can see some of those structures in society, those macro examples that do influence society. You might have written a few of those down yourself, just to list off a few of the traditional ones that we'll be going over in sociology. So you've got crime, for example. People are largely influenced and their interaction is influenced by the crime around them, or perhaps being a victim of crime or a perpetrator. The media will largely influence our actions and beliefs, whether that be something like social media or whether it be something like television or the film industry. We've got others, of course, like religion and belief systems. The family, that's a key one for primary socialization that we'll look at later in the year. Education, that's formally through the curriculum, but also informally. So some of those things we learn, perhaps values and norms for later on in society, for example, the workplace. Yeah, we've got the workplace, poverty, your class, your gender, your race, age, the various identities influence you, but also health and disabilities. So there's quite a few things. These are just a few examples that help to shape an individual and their identity. So why is sociology important? So for task 2, all you're going to do is just note down perhaps one or two of these reasons. Okay, so I'm just going to read through them now. So, of course, employment. Sociology is quite a helpful subject in that it crosses over with lots of different professions and disciplines. So, for example, many people who go on to study sociology at A level and then potentially at university find themselves going down career paths like marketing or business management, perhaps law, psychiatry, policing, politics, social research, all sorts of things. But it's also helpful in terms of challenging inequalities. So that's one of the things that sociologists largely concentrate on. They want to research society and the social world in order to better it and make it a more equal place. So it's a helpful subject in terms of understanding how inequalities essentially become an inequality and how they are worsened and how how to improve or reduce inequalities. It also shapes your life. So whether you realize it or not, sociologists have had a big say on how government policy has been implemented, whether it be in the past looking at housing and welfare policies, or today looking at things like COVID data and patterns of behaviour. It's also good in terms of questioning political opinions. It's great if you have a political opinion, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily helpful unless you have evidence, facts that you can refer back to support your political opinions, and also to challenge and question others. Okay, so they're just some of the reasons why sociology is important. Okay, so for task 3 now, we're going to be going through a timeline really of the discipline of sociology. It's a fairly new subject formally, but it does have a history that goes back quite a few centuries. So what we're going to be doing over the next couple of slides, and you might want to pause it as we go along, so I'm just going to read through that. If you could just write your own timeline, and as part of the stretch and challenge, you might want to consider which one you think has been the most important for the discipline. So in the 4th and the 5th century, you had philosophers like Plato and Confucius, who were starting to question things about society and think what a society should look like. They might not have used the word sociology, but they were starting to ask wider questions about society. Much later on, you have the French Revolution, and this leads to quite a lot of radical social, political, and economic change in European societies. So you have things like urbanization going on, where people are moving to cities. You have democracy, where people, the masses, might for the first time have these freedoms and the opportunity to voice their concerns. Industrialization as well. So you have, for the first time as well, people perhaps building things and working in mass factories. We're moving away from feudalism, agriculturalism, and the monarchy. Okay, so during this time where you have urbanization, democracy, and industrialization going on, people start to think about social change and the things that are going on around them. And they're starting to think, how can we develop our civilizations in society? So how can we best harness urbanization, democracy, industrialization? It's not until the 1800s that the term sociology is first coined, and that's from Augustus Comte, who is a positivist. We're going to be looking at positivism a bit later on in the year, but his desire is for sociology, the study of society, to be like a natural science in its methodology. So using techniques to study society, very similar to what perhaps a biologist, a chemist, or a physicist might do. It's really in the 19th and the 20th century, though, that modern sociology starts to be born. So you have the founding fathers who come up with and really have influenced sociology as we know it today. And you start to see this formation of something we're going to learn a bit later on, consensus and conflict theory in sociology. So you have on the far left-hand side, the functionalists, Emil Durkheim. You have Max Weber in the middle. He's obviously a Weberian associated with interactionism. And then you have Karl Marx on the far right, who's associated with Marxism. Finally, in 1959, you have C. Wright Mills coining the term the sociological imagination. And it's really this emphasis on both macro and micro sociology. So the macro, where, as we said before, these social structures are influencing individuals, but also acknowledging where small interaction may influence a society as a whole. So both the macro and micro are happening simultaneously, both together. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds there. You might want to pause the video just so that you can catch up and go through this again. Right, so moving on to the next bit. What is the sociological imagination? It's really important that we know just on the basis what it constitutes, because it is really at the heart of contemporary sociology and at the course as well, at the course's centre. So the sociological imagination attempts to see social interaction and social situations as social constructs. Okay, in these social constructs, individuals act out certain roles, reflecting the norms, values, and culture within a given society. So we'll come on to those key terms a bit later on in the half term. That's roles, norms, values, that is. So a good way to think of it is you are acting in these social situations, a bit like a performer on stage, the stage being the social situation and the actor being the participant. And your interaction is influenced largely by the constructs that are going on around you. So what script has been outlined for you? What props are there to influence and shape what you're doing? So what I would like you to do now is I would like you to think of your own example for the sociological imagination, perhaps something where an individual is shaping society and also where a macro factor is influencing the individual. So I'm just going to read out an example, an influence of the macro and the micro below. So a person may be unemployed due to their lack of skill, knowledge, and motivation. And that would be a micro influence. That's the individual choosing not to be motivated, perhaps not bettering themselves, or perhaps just not having the ability. But then there's macro influence as well. So you might have the same outcome, but we've got there in a different way. So the society also may be going through a recession with minimal jobs available. The individual may have gone to a poor school due to the area they lived in, which placed little value on learning. The person may experience radical discrimination or racial discrimination rather during their job interview. So we've got things here like poverty, the state of the economy, deprivation, racism. These are all macro factors that might influence an individual getting or not getting a job. Compare that to the micro where the individual might be limited in the skill, motivation, and the knowledge. So if you just come up with your own example now, you might want to pause the video, just give yourself 5 minutes and think of your own example. Okay, so for the final task, of course, you're not in a classroom at the moment, but just think of a classroom. Think of the everyday practices that go on there. And I would just like you to think of, are there any rules or behaviors whilst in the classroom, okay? That might be a construct, that might be influenced by macro factors. Are there any barriers and any roles that you have? For example, I have a role as a teacher. What about your tastes? So your preferences, okay, perhaps your hobbies. Think of those macro factors. Think of applying the sociological imagination. It doesn't have to be in the classroom. It could be regarding anything else, but just to really home in on that idea of the macro and the micro. Right, so that's the last task of the lesson. However, I'm just going to be very briefly going through the course and just the outline of what we'll be doing this year in terms of school support and whatnot in the subject. So we've got some examples here of the sociological imagination around us. So we've got class, gender, age, race, all the identities, the roles, as I said, teacher, student, got hands up, punctuality. So that's an example of a norm and a value. Clothing styles, that might come from subcultures. So there's some examples there of the sociological imagination. But like I said, I want to move on to talk about the breakdown of the exam. So there's 2 papers, and they are broken into 2 sections. So the first paper being about the sociology of the family, and then the second section on the sociology of education. And it's worth 50% of your GCSE. Overall, it's 100 marks. It's for an hour and 45 minutes. And you can see in section A and section B, they're symmetrical in terms of the questions and the values for each question. So there's a range of question types that we'll be going through throughout the year. So there's some 1 markers, some multiple choice, some not. There's some 3 markers. Okay, you've also got some 4 markers there. And then the key ones at the end of each section are the 12 markers. And then for the second paper, it's very much the same. It's also symmetrical. You have crime and deviance and social stratification. And again, it's an hour and 45 minutes, 100 marks and worth 50%, and exactly the same value in terms of questions. There are also research methods that will be going through social theory and just the basics of sociology that go into both of the papers that we'll be learning in the initial half term that will be relevant in both papers, in both sections. If you're curious as well, the exam board is AQA. So you are more than happy, and you're more than welcome rather, to go on AQA and do a little bit of research yourself in terms of the resources, in terms of some of the exam papers. They are available. So I'm not going to go through this because this is online. This is a breakdown of all of the different things that will be in your book. So things like the homework tracker, the assessment tracker, things like that. But this is something I do want you to obviously be aware of. The fact you are here lets me know that you might be aware of some of the elements of it. But just throughout the year, we're going to be doing essay practice as homework. We're going to be doing specific sociological projects, hopefully local area orientated. We're also going to have Seneca, which is very similar to GCSE Pod, and also, obviously, because you're here, YouTube videos. Right, that concludes the lesson for today. The next lesson will be looking at the legacy of Emil Durkheim. Thank you.